And it is the Audible. Good evening to you as I give you a toast with the old Starbucks cup there. It is the Audible Live every Thursday night right here, hanging out, just hanging out like Jay Cutler here on the Google Hangout. It is the footballguys.com podcast. Cecil Lammy, no Sigmund Bloom tonight. He's somewhere naked on an island getting drunk. And literally that might be happening based on the time frame, about 10 o'clock Eastern time. Yeah, Bloom's a late night guy, so maybe a little bit later the clothes may come off. But he's on vacation, Puerto Rico, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So without Bloom, but Matt Waldman, Gene Bramall here, as always, including me. We're going to go through the news and notes from around the National Football League. We're going to go through buy or sell, and we're going to take some of your Twitter questions coming up. So thank you, everyone out there, for joining us. We did have a Twitter question, Matt, about what is Sigmund doing on vacation. I gave it to you right there. I think he's drinking and, having some naked time. I think we all need that, Matt.
Well, I think that's probably the case. Fortunately, he hasn't posted any pictures on Facebook or Twitter just yet, so I think we're good to go.
Don't say that one.
Don't spit that through your nose, eh? What's that? Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So Matt Waldman joins us, and Dr. Gene Bramall. It's always therapeutic hearing the dulcet tones of your voice, brother.
Dulcet tones, indeed. I think the better question for Bloom would be, what isn't he doing on vacation, rather than what is he doing on vacation?
And there we go.
We'll find out next week.
Some things may be better left to the imagination. As always, we appreciate everyone for listening and participating in the show. Listen, all of us love talking about football. We love everything that has to do with football. And whatever you're doing out there, we love you and appreciate you, so thank you. And I'm going to send a special shout-out to my guy, Jay Lyston, of course, who messaged me via Facebook. Jay, artist for Marvel, so that's awesome. As this show, you always say you never know who's listening, so Jay, special hat tip to you, my friend, and all of you out there for listening to the Audible. And we're going to jump right into the news items. And Dr. Gene, we're going to start with you because there's huge news in Dallas. Big news that this defense just did not need. Without Sean Lee last year with a neck injury, there were already enough problems going around with Dallas, who was healthy. Now he's got an ACL injury. The second opinion is out. But, Dr. Gene, I don't care about anyone's second opinion other than yours, brother. So give us the latest here on Sean Lee with the Cowboys. Recovery time, future impact on his career coming off two bigger injuries over the last two seasons, and just an impact on the Cowboys' defense overall. You look at the veteran market, you look at the free agents that are available, a Jonathan Vilma, what have you, not a lot there. So the Sean Lee thing, I guess that panic button should be pressed in Dallas. Dr. Gene, what do you got?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. There's no question that Sean Lee was the heart of that defense. You saw what happened when he went down last year. The linebackers there struggled to find a role, from Bruce Carter to Devontae Holloman to Ori Lemon to Kyle Wilbur to all the guys that had tried to rotate through those positions, Ernie Sims. They weren't really happy with any of them. So it's really disappointing that Sean Lee has had another injury. As you mentioned, this is third season in a row where he's had a major injury that's going to cost him a good part of the year, and it's going to be difficult for him to get back. We've seen guys get back in that 7 to 8 month range, but we're at the beginning of June now, and best case scenario, you'd think that they're looking at him for the end of December, and it's very unlikely that I think at this point we're going to see him until 2015. It's an ACL injury. We heard that maybe the MCL was involved, maybe the meniscus was involved. The most recent thing I've heard is that it is a torn ACL and that there is some meniscus involvement, but the MCL may be okay. If that's the case, there's a chance that he could have surgery sooner than later, which would bump his timetable up possibly to where they might consider leaving him on the PUP and see if he gets a chance to practice at the 5 or 6 month range, but I think it's unlikely that we'll see him this year. Long term, we've seen ACLs not be a major issue to come back from, but you have to wonder, from the dislocated wrist to the plantar plate injury last year to the other nagging issues that he's had with soft tissue things, whether this is a sign that Sean Lee is unfortunately a great talent that may never be fully healthy. So I think it's best to be rooting for him to come back at full strength by this time, 2015.
We get a lot of new listeners on board to the Audible. We've been doing the show since 2006, and Dr. Gene, as kind of a refresher, as I can speak here, and I haven't been drinking other than coffee and water, but the point is this, a refresher course, maybe somewhat brief tonight, on injury prone. And your thoughts there. It's something that we've discussed before at length on this show. But again, lots of new listeners. You ran down the laundry list of Sean Lee's medical problems from the past. Give our new listeners your take, Dr. Gene, on whether a player can be injury prone or not.
Yeah, and I think the short version of the answer to that is yes, they can be injury prone, but labeling one particular player as injury prone versus another is a little bit more difficult to do. Now, if one player has had the same injury over and over and over, a Miles Austin with a hamstring problem, the same leg where you know there's some scarring involved there, yes, then you think you'd consider that particular player injury prone. We've had this discussion with Adrian Peterson. We talked about the differences between Darren McFadden and DeMarco Murray last year. Miles Austin included lots of different guys, and I think yes, players can be considered injury prone. However, it's much more of a backward-looking term than it is a forward-looking term. Yes, they've been injury-prone in the past. Does that necessarily mean that they're going to be injury-prone in the future? How do you put a percentage on that? There's an article on the Second Opinion blog that talks about some of the things. There's a long list of potential things that might put them in a little bit higher an injury-prone category. I'll tweet that out here in a little bit for you guys to take another look at it if you're interested in that. But again, I think the answer to that question is yes, there are injury-prone players. How to identify them is probably a little bit more complicated than just saying they've had a number of injuries in the past.
Well, Matt Waldman is excellent prone, and I know how to identify him. Matt Waldman, of course, from the rookie scouting portfolio on footballguys.com. Matt, as we move on from the Sean Lee situation and take our talents to South Beach, just like No Sean Moreno has done, reports coming out of Miami camp, again, as OTAs and mini camps go on. I'm a little bit sunburnt from being out at Dove Valley the last couple of days, but No Sean Moreno, not in Denver anymore, but in Miami and getting first team work, looking sharp on the first day of organized team activities. That was earlier this week. What's the fantasy angle here with Moreno? And the rest of that backfield, it's kind of a jumbled mess, of course. Everyone's going to look to Lamar Miller and say, we're waiting. We're still waiting, Lamar. They'd made several moves and tried to make some moves at the running back position. You thought that Daniel Thomas would be kind of on the way out there. And then Mike Gillislee, a player that I believe both of us last year, Matt, compared to No Sean Moreno. You hear these reports about Moreno, the seasoned veteran, and perhaps has a chip on his shoulder, being, the 1,000-yard rusher, 500 yards receiving last year, and he didn't get a sniff in free agency. Broncos didn't want him back, just let him go. He made nothing in his one-year deal with the Dolphins. So a motivated Moreno, a pissed off No Sean Moreno, already impressing in Miami. When you hear that news, Matt, what do you think?
Well, I think that it's kind of par for the course right now. What you're looking at is a guy who had to figure some things out in Denver and finally did, and had a really strong season statistically. And as a result, though, he's at the point in his career and with the market with running backs that there's not much demand for a guy who's trying to get a second big contract who's only had really one strong year. And so as a result of that, due to the lesser demand for running backs in a sense, he went down to Miami, and this one-year contract that he has is an extended tryout. That's the best way that you can look at this. This is a kind of I look at it in two ways. One is it's a tryout for Marino, and the other is it's a kind of a McFly knock on the forehead moment for Lamar Miller to say, hey, look, if you don't get this, we've got somebody else here that we can pay a little more money and get rid of you. And this guy has figured it out, and Marino has had that McFly moment. So I think that when you see that, it's kind of a message sender that Miami has brought, and they also have a new offensive line coach, and they have only one player who's returning on that offensive line, Mike Pouncey. Now, if you're going to have a player return, it should be a good center of the caliber of Pouncey. So that should help at least from a play calling standpoint and an adjustment standpoint at the line, that your center is still there. But this is going to be a zone blocking scheme by and large. That's what the offensive line coach, the new offensive line coach, brought over from Texas. being the the Houston Texans. So Marino's comfortable with that zone scheme. Lamar Miller, in theory, is comfortable with that zone scheme. So that should help both of them. But I do think that Marino is a nice value at this point from the standpoint of having him, a little bit at the, early sixth round right now in drafts. That's if you're drafting right now in redrafts. That's not bad. The question, though, again, is this offensive line going to come together? And if the offensive line doesn't produce a lot of nice holes for Marino, you're probably going to see a guy who's going to average below 4 yards per carry because he doesn't have Peyton Manning clearing out safeties for him and clearing out the box and giving him 5-6 men boxes for Marino to take advantage of. It's going to take a really incredible year from Tannehill and this passing offense, I think, for Marino to return to borderline running back one production. But I think that he can be a low-end running back two for you, and at a value of getting him in the sixth round, it's not a bad chance to take.
Yeah, and in a PPR league where he's a proven commodity as a pass catcher, I've said time and time again, Monte Ball will outproduce him as a runner, but not as a receiver. Monte Ball's not going to catch 60 passes this year. 40? Maybe, but not 60, not what Moreno did, and that's really his most outstanding trait. It's not as a runner. Nice stat is that 79.7% of his carries last year for the Denver Broncos came against 6 or fewer in the box. So it's not just the safeties that are taken away, Matt. It's everybody else. 6 or fewer in the box, barely 1,000 yards rushing. It is a nice story, but as you said, low-end RB2, get him at the right spot and don't go too overboard. We've got some more news about the Miami passing game, but back to our news items before we go to buy or sell here. And let's talk about the New York Giants. And, I talked about Lamar Miller, and we're waiting, Lamar. Well, we're also waiting on David Wilson. So, Dr. Gene, this one just comes out this week, and in fact, earlier today, and ESPN.com, that New York Giants running back David Wilson says he feels no pain in his neck as he waits for another round of tests next week. If an MRI comes back clean, Wilson could join teammates on the field for the rest of OTAs and minicamp next month. It's never been a question of talent. All of us on this show have appreciated what David Wilson could be. I just have a feeling, Dr. Gene, that we're always going to look back on his career and say what might have been. He'll be one of those guys where we'll be like, oh, what might, LaShawn Johnson. Matt may be shaking his head or maybe he's not, but LaShawn Johnson years ago, it was always what might have been with this guy if he could have stayed healthy. The fact that he's feeling no pain, from a medical standpoint, these neck injuries, so very tricky, Dr. Gene. This is good news, but how much good news, and how should fantasy owners approach this situation with David Wilson?
With a big old wait and see. It is good news that he's not feeling any pain. That suggests that there's no leftover symptoms from the herniated disc that he had repaired. But the primary issue here was the narrowing of his spinal column. And if that was solely due to the herniated disc, and that was taken care of, and the fusion has made that less likely to be an issue in the future, then yes, no pain is a good thing. We're not likely to see anything on the MRI that's concerning. He'll be cleared to practice and will be ready to hit the ground running next week. But I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. He's admitted that he's a little bit nervous about how this MRI is going to go. He's probably already had an MRI some weeks to months ago that's shown that the bony fusion part of that has already taken hold. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let him be out there running around and doing some, he's not taking any contact, but he was in special teams drills and a few other things this week, today. I don't think he would have been cleared to do that had the fusion not been shown to be effective so far. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not still a concern for some narrowing in that spinal column. And when you're talking about the neck, we talked about this with Jarvis Jones a couple of years ago. Every team doctor is a little bit different in terms of how much the narrowing in that area they'll tolerate. And I think that's probably what the MRI is designed to look at now, almost 5 months after his January neck surgery. So we'll have a good idea on Wednesday whether or not he's going to be cleared to play or not. I don't know that I'd say it's 50-50. I think given the fact that they've allowed him to get on the field and they're going through this process early in OTAs, I think they're hopeful that he's going to be cleared for full contact, but it's too early to say without the MRI.
Well, and kind of piggybacking off this story, Matt, I want to get your thoughts on the Giants' backfield. We glossed over a little bit last week, so we'll keep it somewhat brief. But we'd had a question like, "What's Matt's problem with Andre Williams?" Well, I don't think any of us on this show are over the moon about Andre Williams, the guy, the ultimate space runner. I mean, get this guy some holes, and he looks great. Have him create on his own, not so very much. You've got Rashad Jennings who comes over. Of course, moving on from Oakland as they pick up MJD, keep Darren McFadden. Jennings now with the Giants, and it seems like he'll be the lead back there, but people want to know, Matt, specifically for you, like, what's the problem with Andre Williams? And this is going to be, this has the potential to be a little bit of a mess. Now, Jennings could just take the job and run with it. Is that what you expect? And we know Williams is a two-down thumper. He's not nothing as a receiver, so there's nothing there. But how should fantasy owners navigate this Giants running back situation, Matt?
Well, I think to start with, you got to look at Jennings and decide whether you're sold on him. And there are going to be some people who aren't, because they're going to look at his past as a backup, see a couple of times where he's been injured and has missed significant time, and feel like that he's an injury concern. I don't think he's an injury concern. I think he's a pretty good back who can provide you starter production. And the fact that he's available at the end of the 5th round, to me, presents value, because as Jack Del Rio had said years ago when they drafted him in Jacksonville, that Jennings was one of the best receivers on the team. That's what they felt. He had one of the best pair of mitts in terms of catching the football. I think that, Bloom has alluded to this before, that there's something a little mysterious about the year that Jennings did miss, and some of the things that he had said coming back, in terms of his mind changed or something that he went through that may not have been talked about a lot. But, this is a powerful back with decent speed to the outside who can catch the football. To me, he's a little more athletic version of Michael Bush, when Michael Bush was actually a good fantasy option when he got on the field and got some starting looks. And in this offense, a West Coast deal, I think it's a really good fit for him. So to me, it's between Jennings and David Wilson. David Wilson, as we just talked about, all the talent in the world. So if the neck is healthy and, he doesn't make Tom Coughlin pucker, then, with those fumbles, then we're good to go. I think that it's going to be one of those deals where Jennings gets first crack. If he gets hurt and Wilson plays up to his potential, no one gets that job back other than, Wilson basically solidifies it and he's off to the races. Now, the likelihood of that happening isn't really strong, I don't think. I think it's going to be more of a, Wilson as the change of pace, and Andre Williams is more of a long-term project that you would look at maybe next year as a contributor, unless you see a decimation, at the top of the depth chart. Even then, Andre Williams, the issue that I have with him is that, for starters, like you said, he doesn't block very well. He doesn't catch the ball extremely well. And those are two things that you need from a West Coast back. Third, he played in an offense at Boston College and had really tight line splits. So it's kind of difficult to evaluate a guy like that in difficult line splits, because he looks slow. He looks sluggish. He doesn't look like he can break a lot of tackles. When you look at him in the context of those line splits, when you get him to space and he gets a nice downhill 5-10 yard running start, he looks a little bit more like the monster that people saw when they saw him in shorts and a t-shirt at the combine. But the problem is how often are you going to see a back get a chance to have a 5 or 10 yard running start in the NFL? Not very much. It didn't, it doesn't happen very much for Darren McFadden, and Darren McFadden, we know, is a monster physically, and he still hasn't really shown up more than one season and hasn't been able to stay healthy. On top of that, with these tight line splits, when I look at it, Stanford had tight line splits, even tighter line splits. And when you see that Corey Gerhart showed more athleticism, Stephon Taylor showed more athleticism as a runner than Williams does as a runner. Not in workouts, but as when the pads are on, those guys look quick. They look decisive. They look like they break tackles on a consistent basis, and they do well operating in tight spaces. When they did that in this offense, but neither Andre Williams nor Tyler Gaffney did that extremely well, then I'm a little more suspect of those guys, even if they're workout wonders.
Yeah, and we look at this year's draft class, there were some power backs available, some big backs, I should say. There are very few actual real power backs anymore, but Tyler Gaffney, Andre Williams, pretty much the same. Okay,
Yes.
so people shouldn't be going out of their way to fall all over themselves about Andre Williams. What's funny too is you bring up Ben McAdoo in that system. We're going to spend some time with McAdoo and specifically with our first buy or sell item. So let's go ahead and switch gears into our buy or sell portion of the program. I'm going to go through some more news items from around the National Football League, and then we'll spin it around the zone, the league, and we're going to choose to buy it or sell it. Now, there was a news item that came out earlier today in Football Guys News Wire, and also our newsletter is back, our daily newsletter. Make sure to pick it up. It's free. And listen, you've got a life. We don't. Let us take care of the football side. So go do what you need to do every morning, cup of coffee, bottle of water, what have you. Sit down and read that Football Guys newsletter. Thoughts, opinion on all the latest news and notes from around the NFL. But one of our news items this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, was about Jermichael Finley. Now, Jermichael Finley has been cleared. This was another story that came out on the Newswire today. Cleared for contact. He has been cleared to return, trying to come back from that neck injury that cut his final season short with the Packers. No one's going to question the talent. Then you're going to say, okay, Packers, Ben McAdoo, new offense coordinator. And they needed to. Kevin Gilbride and the old option routes. Might as well have been Cam Cameron's ISO routes of the 90s that he would not go away from. So, the offense was worn and stale. Eli needed some injection of something. Enter Ben McAdoo. And coming over from those Green Bay Packers, the fit with Finley would be great. And what Eli needs more than anything, guys, and obviously I'm buying this fit. If they make it happen, I'm buying this fit with Jermichael Finley with the Giants, not only for McAdoo, but for Eli's sake. He hasn't been the same since he lost that security blanket. And I know Ryan Purvis got mad at me when I asked if he was Matt Ryan's security blanket. Yes, you can be a security blanket for a quarterback, and yes, a guy like Eli Manning needs that to lean on. Since Martellus Bennett, the Black Unicorn, went on to Chicago, he hasn't looked the same. Getting a guy like Finley, a weapon there. You draft Odell Beckham Jr., Randall's still coming around. Of course, you've got Victor Cruz. You throw in a weapon like Finley, a back that can catch out of the backfield like a Rashad Jennings. I love the fit. I'm buying the fit of Jermichael Finley to the Giants. Of course, we have to wait and see if it happens, but the Giants have at least reached out to Finley. I'm buying that big time. No visit scheduled to this point, but again, keep up with the NFL news on our footballguys.com newswire. Dr. Gene, I'll throw this one to you first. Buy or sell Jermichael Finley fitting with the Giants?
I buy the fit, and I think it may say as much about what the Giants feel they have in Adrian Robinson as it does their interest in Jermichael Finley. But I would caution everybody to know that although it's very good news that Jermichael Finley's spinal surgeon cleared him, this is a very high cervical neck fusion that was done and a pretty significant injury that he had. So there are not going to be many teams that clear him to play, if any. They're going to take a very close look at him and decide whether or not they trust that such a high-level cervical spine injury, even though his surgeon is comfortable with him returning to play, whether or not a team, any particular team, is willing to take the risk on. I do agree that the fit with the Giants would be good, both from a depth chart and scheme fit perspective. But, let's take this for what it is, just interest only, and I think they're going to be kicking the tires as much medically, if not more, than wondering whether or not he'll fit with the team.
Matt, are you buying or selling this kicking of the tires?
I'm buying it, though I think that Adrian Robinson knows where Gene Bramall lives since he was in the Cincinnati area. So, Adrian Robinson, one thing that I will counter to Gene's argument is that they didn't draft a tight end. So, and they had an opportunity to draft a tight end, and they didn't, and there were some good ones to be had. So part of that might be to kind of take this a little bit deeper is that Ben McAdoo knows what he has in Jermichael Finley, which is someone who's experienced in his system who can help a young guy like Adrian Robinson actually translate to the system and help him develop, even if they're not sure he's going to be able to play. If they can get him maybe cheap, get him in the camp, give him a chance to prove himself, but more than anything, help coach up these young guys in the system, that might be worth it in itself. But I'm also interested in seeing, I mean, obviously if he's fully healthy and ready to go, then it's no contest. You're going to want Finley at this point. But at the same token, maybe Robinson is good enough that it provides enough competition that maybe, you get Finley in there, he plays well. If something doesn't quite work out from a health standpoint down the road in the short term, they can cut their losses pretty easily, and Robinson might have had enough competition to develop and enough guidance with to have Finley maybe mentor him. Though I think that we would all agree that Finley's track record doesn't seem like he would be the guy to mentor anybody. Until very recently. So it's a very interesting situation. I'm buying it because there's not much to lose, but it's not one that I would be like heavily invested in.
You don't double down on it. Don't push all in on it, if you will.
Not pulling a Clayton Gray.
And Clayton is so damn good at roulette. Got to learn from that guy. Back to the news item and kind of piggyback off what we talked about earlier about the Miami Dolphins. Bill Lazor coming in. I love that. Take it over for Mike Sherman. We'll actually see Ryan Tannehill without Mike Sherman for the first time in the last 8 years, off the top of my head. Pretty close to that. So we'll see how that offense looks. But according to Omar Kelly from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, Mike Wallace looks more comfortable. And in Miami head coach Joe Philbin said as much. Said he's much more comfortable in his second year with the team. Part of it is surroundings. Part of it is expectations. Part of it is that fat $17 million cap number that he's sitting on, and that's not a typo. Mike Wallace looking more comfortable. I'm going to go ahead and sell this. Too many questions. Always back to Batman. Too many questions about this offensive line, which we talked about when bringing up Moreno. The protection on Ryan Tannehill. I love Ryan Tannehill. I think he can be in that echelon with an Andrew Luck, with a Robert Griffin III, with a Russell Wilson. I believe Tannehill can be there. And I know even Omar, when we talked to him last year on the Beat Writer Tour, he thought that was crazy. But I really believe in Tannehill, in his athleticism and in his mettle to make those plays under duress. The problem is too much duress. I think he's getting the David Carr treatment, and he's getting the shut your mouth kicked out of him week in and week out. It's not good for his long-term career. In my opinion, they're doing him a disservice with the horrible Swiss cheese of an offensive line they're putting in front of him, and that's why I've got to sell this Wallace looking more comfortable. It'll come back to the quarterback eventually. Yes, he may actually be more comfortable, Matt, but it doesn't matter if Tannehill's on his ass.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter at all. And I think that the thing is the past 2 years, Mike Wallace has been a low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. He's going in the 8th round right now in fantasy drafts. So I think that's about where you want to value him. It's kind of a boom-bust type of play. And I agree with you completely about Tannehill. I mean, I do think that he is a good player, and he had displays of excellent pocket presence at Texas A&M. But it's hard to get accustomed to the NFL and translate that pocket presence if you're getting shelled every passing down. And that's essentially what's happening to him. And pocket presence can change. You can kind of beat the presence out of a player because it's there's only so many times that you can get the window slammed down on your hand and you're going to leave your hand there in the sill. And I think that that's basically what happens with quarterbacks. So that's why when we look at evaluations and someone say, well, you said the guy had good pocket presence before, but he doesn't have it any longer, or he doesn't have it, what did you not see? And you look at the tape and it's there. A guy like Trent Edwards had good pocket presence at Stanford, but he had, between getting, the snot beat out of him, at Stanford and then with Buffalo, he turned into Captain Checkdown pretty early in his career, where you see moments earlier in his career where you see him going downfield and making plays. I remember a New England game where he looked pretty good, actually, being aggressive, and this was in his first, I think, season as he was getting the chance to start. And then the next year he looked a little bit better. Then he got then he got the crap knocked out of him against the Cardinals, and it was over at that point. And I think that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So with Tannehill, I agree with you. Mike Williams certainly is capable of having big games for you, but in this offense, you're probably looking at Jarvis Landry and Brian Hartline as the go-to guys, along with Charles Clay, and Wallace is a guy that might help you in the red zone here and there, but he's a boom bust play and probably better as a wide receiver 3 at this stage of their careers.
Yeah, hard for those downfield routes to develop. Now, Mike Wallace is more comfortable. By the way, Matt, nice job on not cussing. That's why I say shut your mouth, because then and I say God bless America instead of saying something else. So there are little tips, radio tips that I've learned over the years. I've learned to toss it to Dr. Gene for solid information. Buy or sell Mike Wallace being comfortable, Dr. Gene.
I need some radio tips for my time in the baseball dugout with my 9-10-year-old baseball team, I think. Not just under my breath, but otherwise. Hi, Jack, if you're listening to me tonight. I think you have to sell this. Any veteran player in the second year in an offensive system, or even in his first, I think this is what you're going to hear in May. I'm comfortable. I'm more comfortable than I was last year. Whether or not it's truthful, whether or not it's wishful thinking, whether or not it's optimism, or those two things mean the same thing, but whatever you want to call it, I think, as you guys said, show me the offense works, show me the Tannehill-Wallace connection works, and then I'll buy it.
Moving on in buy or sell, we're going to go to St. Louis. Interesting news item that came out today via the News Wire, and this one coming in from NFL.com, originally quoting Ryan Van Bibber from SB Nation. St. Louis Rams rookie running back Trey Mason said the coaching staff told him he will compete for the starting running back job during training camp. Interesting news for Zach Stacy, of course, the second-year pro from Vandy, who had damn near 1,000 yards rushing, even though in the first 4 weeks of the season he had one carry. So, they messed around with Darryl Richardson. Of course, he's gone now. Finally turned things over to Zach Stacy, and Zach Stacy did a fine job on an offense that was desperate for weapons and trying to move the ball in any way possible, running with that strength between the tackles. I admire and appreciate Trey Mason for his upside, but to say, and again, coach speak, perhaps, Dr. Gene, not that kind of coach speak from the dugout, but coach speak in the fact of, well, come on, kid, you'll compete for the starting job. I'm selling this because I look at Zach Stacy, and compared to Trey Mason, I like Trey Mason. He's one of the backs out of this. It was a bad class of running backs. Let's be very clear about that. But out of this bad class of running backs, Mason is one of the guys, one of the three that I've pegged that have star potential in this class. Jeremy Hill is the other one. Isaiah Crowell's the other one. And I appreciate a guy like Kadeem Carey, et cetera, Charles Sims, what have you. But those are the three that could, if things hit, have some star potential here. Trey Mason isn't going to start over Zach Stacy, in my opinion. Dr. Gene, coach speak, buy or sell. I'm selling this. Your thoughts?
I agree. I'm going to sell it. I'm a big Zach Stacy fan. I think Trey Mason could potentially cut into, and may well, and probably will, cut into Zach Stacy's carries enough that we won't see that 250 carry season and only, a certain number of games that he started last year. But I think Zach Stacy is still probably the foundation back for that running game with Trey Mason working in. And I'd like to thank Matt Waldman for giving me enough time to process the picture of Buttermaker before I started my response there. And if I had a 10-year-old girl who could break off a curveball like Amanda Wurlitzer, I would sign her up in a second.
Well, Waldman, you got the Bad News Bears logo there on your screen.
No, this is a Google satellite photo that they've shown from their little X room, whatever it is that they have of Gene. It looks like he got a little bit of sun,
Are you going Edward Snowden on us, man? Are you tapping into the NSA, into these spy satellites, getting right into the dugout?
He knows what's in my closet. I actually have a Bad News Bears jersey upstairs in my closet. Maybe I'll wear it next week. So get out of my closet, Matt Waldman.
Look, considering that my little league team, my first little league team, was sponsored by the Blue Velvet Lounge, no joke, Blue Velvet Lounge. Does that actually carry off anywhere else nowadays? I mean, would that actually happen anywhere? Maybe it would still happen in Northeast Cleveland, but I mean, that's about the only place anyway. Anyway, as far as like these players, as far as where we're looking at,
No, the heck with that. Let's keep talking about sponsorships in baseball. 'Cause my kids are sponsored by a urologist, and their uniform is lime green. Carry on.
Wow.
Yeah, okay, you've taught me there. So David Lynch movies with lascivious thoughts aside, Zach Stacy, Trey Mason. I look at it this way: they need to get this guy to compete. They want to give him every opportunity to do well. He certainly is a talent. He certainly hasn't had a lot of experience pass protecting. And that's going to be the big key between him becoming a starter in this league and being a contributor, a limited contributor with talent between the tackles. So Zach Stacy has that down, and what we need to see here is that this is kind of more of a player's coach, Jeff Fisher, saying, look, you're talented. We're going to give you every chance. Let's see how fast you can develop. And what that means to me is if Trey Mason shows skill at picking up the pass protection schemes and executing well in the preseason and training camp, then he's going to compete for time with Zach Stacy. If he's unbelievable, he'll beat Zach Stacy. If he's not, then he will cut into some of Stacy's time and be an annoyance to fantasy owners who were favoring Stacy. And if he struggles, he could be the number 3 back behind Benny Cunningham, who is not inspiring at all as a runner, but gets the job done when there's creases available. And then we'll be looking at someone like Trey Mason for 2014 as opposed to 2013. So to me, it's a wide open situation, but the odds based on what we see on film, the odds are in the favor of Stacy keeping his starting job and still putting up probably quality running back 2 numbers this year.
Matt, please tell me you have a fantasy team named Blue Velvet Lounge.
I do not. I do not. But I will say we won the championship at the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs with a home run, or the walk-off home run. So not bad for a bunch of 7 and 8-year-olds who were sponsored by some dive somewhere in Northeast Cleveland.
To tap a keg after that.
I'm sure that our coaches snuck one, but I think we were at the local Dairy Queen.
There you go, a little flask in that dugout as Buy or Sell continues here on the Audible every Thursday night, right here hanging out on Google Hangout. And next up, we're going to talk about the Jets quarterback competition. I had a question earlier this week on Twitter that's said, why would they get Chris Johnson when they've got other speed backs available, and why would they Michael Vick when you want Geno Smith to be a guy? And I just answered the Twitter follower, and I said, when did the Jets do the right thing? I mean, they grab Eric Decker, and this is their big move. It's like, we've got Decker. Awesome. You've got Peerless Price. You've got Alvin Harper. You don't have a number 1. And, oh, yeah, you didn't get anybody else. So Decker and Jeremy Curley aren't exactly going to scare the bejesus out of opponents that you face there. Jason Morrow, okay, I appreciate that. But, again, you don't have the answers. And they continue to make these type of decisions. The quarterback competition, Marty Morningweg chimed in on this, new OC, of course, and said, hey, it's a competition. It might not be quite like the competition we had last year where everything was 50-50, said Morningweg, alluding to the open competition between Geno Smith and, of course, Michael Vick this year. Mike has all that experience banked. We'll leave that one alone. We're trying to continue the progress with Geno and then have Mike ready to go. It's just that simple, and Mike knows exactly what the expectations are and the role that he has. Morningweg said earlier this offseason that Smith will receive more practice repetitions than Vick. Unlike Buffalo, who went all in on E.J. Manuel, and yes, the difference in where they were drafted, not an incredible difference, though. The Jets and Rex Ryan, most importantly, in this season where this is it for Rexy, okay? And I'm quite surprised, kind of like a Jason Garrett, why'd you keep him around? This is it for Rexy if he doesn't get it done. We'll talk about Garrett and the Cowboys on another show, but this is it. And to have that mentality, to have a quarterback there like Michael Vick, who is better than Geno Smith, period, point blank. If Geno Smith comes out and wows and looks completely different and much more savvy in the preseason, then I'll be interested in that. But as of right now, based on what I know about both players, Michael Vick is better. They're going to give more reps to Geno because they really want him to be the guy, but they've got Michael Vick right there. So even if somehow Geno wins the competition in week 1, Vic's going to start, and if he's healthy, he may start a majority of these games because he's simply just better than Geno Smith, and certainly with the athleticism, the arm strength, etc., and all that experience cached on a team where you've got to win because your coach is on the outs. If he doesn't, I hear this, Dr. Gene, about the open competition. First, I roll my eyes because it's the Jets, and when do they ever do anything right? Second, I go, what kind of competition is it really when it's stacked almost against Geno? They're going to give him more reps, Dr. Gene, but that doesn't mean that he's going to do anything with those reps. Your thoughts and buy or sell on this Jets open quarterback competition?
No, I agree with where you're coming from, but I do think we approach this as if it's Geno's job to lose. I think that's what they've said. That's what they hope for. And again, maybe that's optimistic, but I think that's what they're expecting. Michael Vick will be there and ready, but if he does get a chance to play, we've seen that, back to the injury-prone discussion, he's not exactly finished a month or 2 months fully healthy from a hamstring injury perspective, from a hand, from a chest injury, all the shots that he takes there, and without knowing exactly where he's going to throw the ball and how that offense is going to look, we may see a yo-yo effect where Geno Smith is given the starting job, isn't effective, Vic comes in, gets injured, Geno comes back in. As you know, Rex Ryan may have a tough road to hoe ahead of him here with deciding and how the injury situations go with both of those guys. But I do think this is very much Geno's job to lose at this point, regardless of how well Vic plays through the early part of the offseason.
And Matt, your thoughts on buy or sell when you hear open quarterback competition with the Jets?
I think that when I see this situation, you just look at the past few years with the New York Jets, and it's one of those deals when it comes to running back, quarterback, and even wide receiver. And I think they got wide receiver settled. I think they finally turned this thing around, and it's no longer a carnival ride. I think that they know who they're going to have. But when it comes to running back and quarterback, I still think that really what you have is this. This is what the New York Jets have. They've moved. They should just be called like the Coney Island rides or something, because really somewhere back there in the back, you see there's Vic and there's Smith. You can't see them there. They're probably at back around there. But Rex Ryan is in the foreground. He's taking this picture, and I think he's got like a paint gun, or probably a paint machine gun, or like a paint bazooka. And what he does is these guys go around, and if he doesn't like something about their form, he takes aim and shoots them off the horse and basically pulls the other one in and says, "You're up." I mean, that's what he does. Michael Vick, he's going to miss some protections. He usually misses some protections. He usually gets the snot smacked out of him somewhere at some point because of the fact that he misses protections. And I don't see how that's going to change in New York. It's probably going to happen to him again. And if Rex doesn't like it, if he sees him fumble the ball at one point, he's going to take his defensive mentality and go, "You're out of here. Let's put Smith in." If Smith does that, he's going to say, "You're out of here. Let's put him in here." Chris Johnson takes it to the corner store one too many times and doesn't run it up the middle the way he should. It's Chris Ivory's turn. Chris Ivory has a boo-boo and he's limping around a little bit and pouting. They'll put Daryl, they'll put, who is it from the Rams? It was Daryl Richardson. They'll take Daryl Richardson and put him in. If that doesn't work, they've always got Bilal Powell, who's going to get them 3 to 4 yards, for a little bit, and then he runs and maybe gets 5 or 6 or 8 yards after maybe, the 5th or 6th time, and they go, "He's getting hot. Let's take him out and put Chris Johnson back in for his -2 and hope that he gets a 30-yard gain for a touchdown, at least one of these carries, so that he can get into the positive at the end of the day." So this is what the Jets represent to me when you plug in these players and look at them in the past. Hopefully it's better, but I wouldn't touch any Jet skill player when it comes to quarterback or running back before, say, the 7th or 8th round. Chris Johnson, to me, I know that is a late fifth round pick, mid to late fifth round pick. I don't want him. Maybe it's because I'm an old Titans fan, but it's just, I look at the situation. It's just right for Rex Ryan to just, to micromanage this to death and not let these players get into the flow of the game.
Rex Ryan could be like Tommy Boy when he does his JoJo the Idiot Circus Boy routine, and he takes his pet and he massages it and he loves it because he's a naughty pet, and then he goes like that. By the way, you could, instead of taking Chris Johnson, looking at current average draft position, you could wait around, hell, almost 2, and grab Steven Jackson at the end of the 6th.
Gladly.
Yeah, much smarter play. I know somewhere Mark Weimer's pumping his fist. Buy or Sell continues here on the Audible each and every Thursday night right here hanging out on Google, and we're going to go to our nation's capital, and we're going to talk about Washington, or we're going to talk about Robert Griffin III, and he's working on his mechanics. And this one, again, coming in from ESPN.com. Robert Griffin III spent part of the offseason working with Terry Shea. He's been focusing on using a quicker release, more over the top, and having a more narrow base when he throws. Head coach Jay Gruden said the team has harped on Griffin's fundamentals, and he likes how Griffin has responded. Gruden says he's a sponge for info. I kind of like this Robert Griffin III. I don't know if Jay sounds like John, but I'm just going to make it up. A sponge for information. Dr. Gene, when you hear this, and by the way, I'm going to sell this, honestly, and no offense to Terry Shea and the quarterbacks that he's worked with, but for me, I never thought he overstrode, had a too wide of a base when he released the football. Did he flick it at times? Yes, certainly, but is he capable of going over his head with a nice high release? Yeah, he's done it before now and need to do it consistently. I didn't see necessarily the footwork problems other than having his feet completely set at times and stepping fully into his throws. You certainly saw after the knee injury he was thinking about that, and he was kind of short-stepping some throws. But as far as like having too wide of a base, I never really saw that. I always thought it was already somewhat shallow, maybe even too shallow, as he was kind of hopping back and thinking about that knee. Dr. Gene, working on his mechanics, that's fine. What about the mental side? And is he still thinking about that knee? That's what I want to see, Dr. Gene.
And I think that may be what's going on here. I can't really speak to whether or not his mechanics were perfect or near perfect previously, but if these repetitions and the work on the mechanics gets him to focus on his footwork a little bit more and help that ball come out a little bit more quickly so that he doesn't get caught up in thinking about what he's doing during the in-game repetitions that he has, then I think this is a good thing. Whether or not that actually translates and that becomes the case, I don't know the answer to that, but hopefully that's probably part of what's going on. Is let's reset his mental repetition such that the footwork becomes second nature to him, and we don't see some of those slippages in his mechanics that aren't necessarily because his good mechanics when they're there are poor, but no longer the mental side of things is an issue for him. Hopefully that's what we're seeing here.
Matt, what do you think? Buy or sell this RG3 working on his mechanics?
I'm buying it, but not for the reasons that they're saying. I think that the reasons that he needs to work on his mechanics doesn't come with his normal drop and delivery, but it comes after he has to deal with pressure and he has to slide up in the pocket a little bit. Because what ends up happening with a guy like Robert Griffin, who was such a dynamic runner or used to being a dynamic runner, and we'll see whether he is or not anymore after this year, now that he's had a full year and a half to recover from this knee injury. If he's still that dynamic player a la Griff, a la Vic, when it comes to breaking the pocket, their tendency, because they're so quick, is to plant off one foot and make a dynamic move, a spin, or to juke away from somebody, drop their head and run. Well, but they're still kind of hedging their bets because they know that if they don't find an open lane, but they can get away from a defender, that there may be time to buy that they can look downfield and throw the ball. The problem is that their form has gotten so out of whack from trying to make this evasive maneuver as a runner, that then they have to reset and throw, and they don't always do that. And there's times I've seen Griffin where his stance gets wider as a result of that, because he's kind of hedging his bets between being a runner and a passer. So what I would like to hope that they're to see them doing is that they're working on him sliding up in the pocket with shorter steps, and using that a little bit more often, so he's not making as much of a dramatic move early, and relying more on that technique. And if he's able to do that, find an open spot and let go of the ball quicker, then that I would buy, and hopefully that's what they're doing. And then if they don't find anything downfield, if he doesn't find anything downfield after making that slide, then he breaks the pocket and makes a dramatic move. That to me would make sense based on what I saw last year. But in terms of just his general throwing stance, in rhythm, what he does, I agree with Cecil. It was generally a narrow base. I don't think it needs to get any narrower. If it did, I think somebody needs to get fired when it comes to coaching, or they've come up with a revolutionary technique that they're going to be teaching everywhere.
Throwing with your legs crossed. Coming up next. That's what it would be, honestly. It would be like this. Like, hey, there's my new throwing motion. The Audible Live continues as we move on. We've got your Twitter questions coming up. Hashtag Audible Live. Make sure to get them in. Following at The Audible, at Cecil Lammy, at Matt Waldman, and at Gene Bramwell. We keep it simple. So those coming up in just a little bit. But let's talk about Arizona and Bruce Arians and the Raspberry Beret. I love him. I love what the capability of this offense could be. I love the fact that Andre Ellington now, in a story that comes from Mike Jurecki, of course, Mike Jurecki there in Arizona, and with the Fox Sports, 9:10 a.m. in Phoenix, and I'm sure I don't have the call letters here, but I'm sure it's 9:10 a.m. The Fan or the Zone or the Locker Room or every sports station, it's always the same. But anyway, so Mike Jurecki down there says, Bruce Arians mentioned Andre Ellington is the number one back and expects him to get 25 to 30 touches per game. Fantasy owners, to quote Daffy Duck, drool. And if you look at the current average draft position of running back 17, Andre Ellington, if he's able to maintain through that size of a workload, and some of these will be receptions, of course, and is it going to be 27 on average per game? No, but even if we're approaching 22 on average per game, this is great news with Ellington's big playability with this vertical offense. Listen, if you're a defender and you're facing Arizona, first off, I'm buying this, and I'm buying 2 of these. Just always have a backup copy. I'm buying this in a big way because of Ellington's explosiveness and ability in open space. And when you play against a vertical offense, you don't have time to peek in the backfield. If you're a defender, you're not sitting there staring at Carson Palmer. You're trying to run vertical, so Michael Floyd or Larry Fitzgerald don't run by you. This creates gaps, and once Ellington gets to that second level, and there's already a gap there because your second and third level guys have vacated the premises, this could be some big plays there from Andre Ellington with that speed, with that agility. I love this, Dr. Gene, so much so that I bought 2, not 4 copies like I do of The Walking Dead each month, but at least 2 copies of Andre Ellington getting 25 to 30 touches per game. Dr. Gene, buy or sell that?
I think I have to sell that. My 10th grade math, 4th grade math, 3rd grade math tells me that 25 touches a game is 400 touches for the season. 30 touches a game is 480 touches for the season. I don't see that happening. No, I appreciate that that's the goal. In a good game script, in a good situation, that they're going to try to get him close to 25 touches a game. And you look at the depth chart behind him at the running back position, and you're not impressed necessarily with Stephen Taylor and Jonathan Dwyer and whoever else they may bring in or try to get on the depth chart behind those guys. And yes, there's going to be, hopefully, even with Larry Fitzgerald and Michael Floyd there, some balance in the run-pass game to where you're going to see 400 rushing attempts probably throughout that depth chart, but I don't know that you want Andre Ellington trying to hold up over a goal of a 350 carry season or 350 touch season, even though hopefully he's the type of a player that won't be taking many direct hits. I think it's pretty easy to say if you're going to set the under for me at 400 touches on Andre Ellington for the season that you take the under.
Matt, your thoughts, buy or sell Andre Ellington with 25 to 30 touches. Gene brought in math to the argument.
I'm bringing in, if I had aluminum foil, I'd make a tinfoil hat right now. Because the reason I'd make a tinfoil hat and put it on is that Bruce Arians all last year basically got harassed by the media, by anybody who does any type of number crunching for websites everywhere, saying you need to give, they need to give Andre Ellington more touches. He looks so good. You need to give him more touches. Are you going to give him more touches? Are you going to give him more touches over Rashad Mendenhall? And I think he just got sick and tired of hearing about it, because last year he kind of stubbornly said, no, we see him as more of a change of pace back. And Ellington kept playing good. And I go, oh, Bruce, he looked good. Are you going to give him more touches? I think this year, after seeing the film and seeing that Ellington indeed looked good, and looking it over and reviewing everything, probably felt like we do need to get him more touches. But I'm just going to hold this. I'm just going to kind of meet this at the pass here and say to all the guys who are going to be asking me this all spring, all summer, am I going to get more touches? I don't want to hear it anymore. So I'm just going to tell them that I'm going to give Ellington 25 to 30 touches a game. That will shut them up, because I'll go, oh, good, he's going to get enough touches. But the last guy to get that many touches, I think, was this guy right here, which is James Wilder Jr.'s daddy. And now this was a man. This was a guy who could take 400 touches and keep coming for it. Andre Ellington is a man, but he ain't that kind of man. He's not going to be able to handle that in today's NFL. So when we look at this, I think that Ellington is someone I'd buy as a fantasy commodity. I certainly want to see him get somewhere between 14 to 17 touches a game. I think he's going to get that many combined rushing and receiving. He's going to have a good season. But hell no, he is not going to get 400 touches in a season. If Adrian Peterson hasn't gotten, that kind of carries at this point, the guy with the bionic knee, I don't think that we're going to see Andre Ellington get those types of touches.
By the way, we're going to look at those helmets as essentially leather helmets compared to today's technology, but I love that face mask. My face mask was like that, and I love James Wilder, so there you go. If you bring up Gerald Andrews, then I may shed a tear on tonight's show. Just a couple of more news items to go here. And something that we did talk about last week, so I guess we'll keep it somewhat brief, but now we've got another Texans wide receiver that's frustrated. We talked about Andre Johnson last week, but Dr. Gene, now DeAndre Hopkins, Nuke Hopkins, has admitted that he's struggling to pick up the new offense under Bill O'Brien, as well as connect with the new group of bad quarterbacks. Oh, well, I put the bad in there myself, but I mean, seriously, Tom Savage, ladies and gentlemen, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, and T.J. Yates, and Case Keenum, and now you've got Johnson and Hopkins frustrated, so much so that it's boiled to the surface. Perhaps Nuke Hopkins should have kept this, in the locker room behind closed doors or within that building, but it's out. We know that he's frustrated in this new offense. I mean, defensively, they're going to hold teams to 3 points, and they're going to lose 3-0. Dr. Gene, buy or sell DeAndre Hopkins, and I'm obviously buying the fact that he could be frustrated with that group of slappies they call quarterbacks.
Well, I think you buy the fact that he's probably frustrated, but it's early. It's June. We're just starting in OTAs. It is a new group of quarterbacks, a new offense. I'm not worried about him assimilating the offense necessarily. He's a good route runner. He's a smart kid. That'll come around in time. You wonder if the I'm frustrated is couched in, I'm not sure I understand the playbook very well, but is really rooted in, as you said, I don't trust any of these quarterbacks to be able to get me the ball in any situation, even opposite Andre Johnson, and that frustrates the heck out of me long term. That situation may not get better at any point, and that would be, again, a good reason for him to be frustrated and already be talking about it now. Not that there much can be done about it, but hopefully that the additional reps that he'll have through OTAs, mini camps, and training camp will be able to get him a little bit better with the offense, and somehow one of those quarterbacks will step up to be able to get that offense running from a passing perspective.
Matt Waldman, there is a frustrated more than one wide receiver in Houston. Now it's DeAndre Hopkins. Are you buying or selling this?
I'm buying it. I mean, I just think at this point, when you have your veteran Andre Johnson, who is such a stalwart of this team and who generally is very quiet, doesn't really say much, doesn't make a big deal on anything, is a very undiva-like receiver, and the only time he does speak is when Cortland Finnegan decides that he needs to say something, and then he shuts him up with his hands. So I think, yeah, pretty much, yeah, he laid the wood to him. So I think that when you look at that situation, it's not good. And when you have a young player like DeAndre Hopkins who is learning from a veteran like Andre Johnson, and when Johnson opens his mouth and starts talking bad about the organization, a second-year player who doesn't know any better is likely to do the same, especially when the example is someone who is as has such a good reputation as Johnson. So this is deteriorating kind of fast to me. I think this is shaping up to be two sides really posturing about whether or not Andre Johnson is going to get out of town, and it's one of those deals where if it turns out that Hopkins is going to be the de facto number one at this point, if that happens, he might have decent fantasy value, but he's going to be one of those guys that you'll be watching probably during the year and going, wow, he's like just a halfway decent quarterback from being a wide receiver two, a strong wide receiver two, maybe even a wide receiver number one at this rate. But he'll be productive enough for you to start probably in some leagues, but a guy that's going to be very frustrating to watch because of the fact that this offense is in its first year and they don't really have anybody to throw him the ball at this stage.
Maybe I should start drinking because I combined Gerald Riggs and William Andrews in my mind, Matt, and I said Gerald Andrews.
I figured that's who you were talking about.
A cloned person, a combined DNA of Gerald Riggs and William Andrews. I apologize to my guy, William Andrews, there with the Atlanta Falcons. We don't have power backs like we had back then. Okay, let me get in my Get Off My Lawn segment, brought to you by Scott's Seed. Get Off My Lawn segment. I will say this: we don't have power backs like we used to. We used to have power backs in the National Football League. We used to have guys that you would be scared of, that linebackers would fear, that would intimidate, that would dominate. Now we've got Adrian Peterson and
let me tell you one story about William Andrews, because when I first moved down from Ohio and watched the Falcons, Andrews was a rookie, I believe, that year. He and Lynn Kane were working together in that offense, and I watched a preseason game where he caught a swing pass in the right flat and basically takes about 3 steps, and there's this safety from the 49ers who I think he was a safety at that time. Maybe he was still playing corner, but he was a hitter, and he came flying in looking like he was delivering a kill shot, hit Andrews. Andrews just kind of lowered his shoulder a little bit and knocked that player cold and took off for about, I think it was like a 50, 60-yard touchdown up the right sideline, and they had to help that player off the field. That player was Ronnie Lott.
There you go.
Yeah.
The guy that cut off his own finger. Get me back in the game.
Ronnie Lott cold, and he didn't even break stride.
Yeah,
he was an amazing football player, William Andrews.
End of story. And it's one of the reasons why those guys like Earl Campbell, they burn bright, but just for a short amount of time, because man alive, did they punish people truly. They'd be penalties. They'd be fined. They'd be fined so much in today's NFL they wouldn't get a salary. It's just, again, Get Off My Lawn. We're going to have to do that segment. Dr. Gene, we need to think of a sponsor for Get Off My Lawn. I kind of like this.
Skittles. We'll use Skittles as the sponsor because I put Marshawn Lynch in that category too.
There we go. Get Off My Lawn. Brought to you by...
In my day, we didn't have any foundation men.
We didn't have athletic footwear. We had one size shoe, size 7, and you wore it and you liked it. And if you didn't, it didn't matter because that's the way it was. And we liked it that way. We loved it. Don't get me started on old SNL routines. Let's go ahead and get into the Twitter questions. I got a news item about Marcus Wilson. We'll save that for another time. Just know people in Mark Trestman's system. Wilson is a player to certainly monitor. Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey there as well. Wilson one of these guys maybe not getting as much lip service as he should, but definitely could be worth it for you to monitor in your fantasy leagues. Now, we're going to do the Twitter questions in a new and exciting way. First off, we get so many we can't answer them all. We thank everyone out there for asking, and if we don't answer it this time, it doesn't mean that we don't like you or unfollow us or whatever. Like, it's a time issue. We could and we have spent shows in the past where all we do is answer a bunch of questions because there's a lot of different angles, a lot of different questions. What we're going to do is each one of us is going to pick one question to ask the other one of us. Each one of us will ask a question. Each one of us will answer a question. And because I'm running the show, I will start first. If you go to Twitter and you search the hashtag Audible Live, and, like Nick asked about Moreno and Bill Lazor. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. We talked about the Giants' offense and expectations there as well. Chad asks this one for you, Dr. Gene. How do you get longtime friends to embrace auction drafting? And as a person that when in the Colorado Pigskin League, when we first started auctions, I remember Big E, my best friend, who's fighting cancer right now. So everyone, I appreciate all the kind words and thoughts that I get, messages on Twitter, etc., and all the Bills Mafia that shows up in support of Big E. When Big E came to me in the year 2000 and said, we're going to switch to an auction, I fought it tooth and nail. I hated it. Why would you do it? Here's my answer to Chris's question, Gene, and I'll toss it to you. Just have him try it. Once I tried an auction, I don't like doing redrafts, honestly. I'll do them now. Fessel, Alpha, or whatever we do on the Football Guys staff leagues. I just don't enjoy them as much as I do auctions. So I guess my advice would be just have them do it. So in a sense, I ask myself the question, but I make the rules and I break the rules. Dr. Gene, your thoughts to answer Chris's question. If you've got longtime friends that have cold feet on auction drafting, it doesn't take that much longer, if longer at all. It's not so complex. You don't need an abacus or anything to figure things out. Dr. Gene, how do you get people to take the plunge?
I don't have too much to add. I was hoping to get a chance to ask that question to you because I know you've been a big fan of auctions, so I'm glad you answered that question. And I would have answered it in the same way, which is to give it a try. But not only to give it a try, but try to do it in a live setting. Auctions, now with reality sports online, with MFL, there's lots of good online league management tools that manage auctions very well for you. But there isn't anything better than looking one of your friends in the eye and overbidding them, or playing auction cop, or any of those things. I think there's certainly something to drafting live, but there's something very much to auction drafting live. So as Cecil said, give it a try, but to the extent that you can, try to do it in a live setting, and it'll be very hard to go back after you do that.
Dr. Gene, this is like tag, so now it's your turn. Tag, you're it. You get to pick a question to ask anyone.
Exactly, and I'm going to ask Matt this question. We'll just kind of go around the horn here, and I like where Anthony Browner, Go Vikes 0910, was going with this, and I'm curious, if Matt was a billionaire, which professional sports team he would buy. I'd pick the Clippers and put Magic Johnson and clones of Magic Johnson at every courtside seat. But Matt, he wrote a good futures article for Football Outsiders a little while ago, noting how he would approach his sports team. Now I'm curious about which sports team he would buy.
Oh, it's no question. Do you want to guess, Cecil? Do you want to guess who I would buy?
Cleveland.
You bet I would buy Cleveland. Of course I would buy Cleveland, because we'd have to put this this kind of ownership and what's going on here out of their misery. I would buy it, and I would apply exactly what I did to the Cleveland Browns, and then I would give the city back that team, within about 15, 20 years, so that they could run it. And if they run it into the ground, it's on them. But I'm expecting that by that point, that the Browns would return to their winning ways back from the 80s and then maybe before that. But yeah, no question. I mean, I don't follow them as much, but once you were a major diehard fan of a team, when you're the kind of fan that you get upset when your team loses and it takes you like 10 days, to get over the loss, and they're already playing 7 days later, that's the kind of fan I probably was of them back when I was a kid. And I haven't been a fan like that since of any sports team. So, yeah, if I had a chance to buy a team, it would be the Browns, most definitely.
On Twitter, hashtag Audible Live. Matt, you've got a question for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, looking at this, let's see. I think that the one that I would like to see most from you also comes from Anthony. I'm sorry, Anthony asked a lot of good questions, so I'm gonna go with this one. Cecil, which rookie this year will be a top 10 player at his position in 2 years?
A top 10 player at his position in 2 years. I'm going to say Cody Latimer. Why? And because, one, it's a Broncos show, but two, he's going to be the wide receiver too. And I've talked about Emmanuel Sanders now to Broncos OTAs. And again, I report on what's happening out there. And I know there are some in the fantasy community that are passing on Emmanuel Sanders. I understand that, okay? Everyone has different philosophies, and everyone can be right and everyone can be wrong, and that's fine. My observations or my reporting, my opinions are based on firsthand observations, not I think or I heard or I want. It's what do I see? What do I see is Emmanuel Sanders running wild at OTAs. So for the people out there like, well, he's not going to replace Decker. No, he could be better than Decker. There are people within that organization that feel that he is better than Decker. Do you want a guy better than Decker on your fantasy team that, by the way, you can get at a discount? The answer is not yes, but it's hell yes. And that's Emmanuel Sanders' role this year. Wide receiver 26 right now, 604. He's going to outperform that average draft position and could outperform it by 10, 15 spots. What about next year? Welker moves on. Cody Latimer steps into the starting lineup. And then when I look at his skill set and his ability to use his frame to be that true red zone presence, we know whether we like it or not, no matter the scoring system, PPR, whatever, a lot of fantasy leagues just come back to those touchdowns, baby. How many times you get in the end zone? And whereas Sanders, I will say this, I can't comment specifically how Gase is using Sanders. Let me just say he's being more creative than I thought. Even a guy, and I love Adam Gase, everybody knows that, but he's doing things with Sanders that'll blow your mind when you see this on the football field. That's Latimer next year, anyway, in a different way. And whereas Sanders, I appreciate the way they're using him, I'll still question the red zone presence, and that's one place where Eric Decker excelled and where Emmanuel Sanders, with 11 career touchdowns, Decker had 11 last year. Also, Emmanuel Sanders never had a 100-yard receiving game in his career. He's probably going to have multiple games this year. But next year, Sanders moves into Welker's role as the slot guy. Latimer is grooming now. Talked to Demaryius Thomas today, nothing but gushed about the rookie and his ability and the fact that he talks to him every day. He texts him, he calls him to get into this playbook. The kid's already an outstanding blocker. Kid's already got the ability to fly down the field, knows how to use that frame. And when you talk about high-powered offenses, if we had seen Peyton Manning stumble a little bit, and not look like his old self, you could say, okay, well, they got this year, and then who knows after that. But if we're talking about next year, top 10, and yeah, you may think, well, how could that? It could happen because we saw Peyton Manning have the best season of his pro career. Maybe at the end of this year, we'll see a little bit of that age creeping up on him, but we haven't seen it yet. And going based off that, if we're talking top 10, it means you got to be on a high-powered offense, a high-powered system. I mean, it's easy to say Sammy Watkins because Watkins is a smaller version of Calvin Johnson, in my opinion. It's easy to say Mike Evans because Mike Evans has the talent. He'll have the system with Lovey in place to work opposite of Vincent Jackson. It's easier to say those type of players. I appreciate what Ben McAdoo is going to do. I love Odell Beckham Jr., the fact that unlike other LSU receivers, he doesn't have to come in and learn everything. Hey, you're really athletic. Can you catch a pass? This is LSU's recruiting process for wide receivers. Like, hey, athlete, catch passes. They come to the pros and they have a lot to learn. Brandon LaFell, Ruben Randall, list goes on and on. Terrence Tolliver couldn't even get a sniff. So the point is this. I'm going to look to the rookies that maybe you're going to get at a discount but have the amazing upside. And you're going to get them at a discount this year, somewhat for Cody Latimer. And I don't have the rookie ADP in front of me, but you'll get them at more of a discount than you will Sammy, than you will Mike Evans, than you will Beckham, God forbid Kelvin Benjamin. Laugh at whoever in your rookie draft takes Kelvin Benjamin, and you grab Cody Latimer later, and laugh knowing that you've got a number 2 wide receiver in 2015 for a Peyton Manning-led offense. So for me, that's my notice I didn't say running back, but for me, that's my answer at that position. Matt, I see your head shaking.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I believe he's either my number 4 or 5 ranked wide receiver in this class, and I've drafted him pretty much every draft that I could get my hands on him, either trading down or trading up to get him. So everything you said, preaching to the choir.
There we go. And Dr. Gene, quickly before we call it a wrap for tonight's program, when you hear or you see my tweets about Emmanuel Sanders, and again, people are split on this, and that's fine. I don't care about the split, okay? I just care about, okay, what are we seeing? What's going on? So people are split on this, on Emmanuel Sanders. To me, it is a little bit baffling. Maybe they just don't like skill set or don't believe he can stay healthy or whatever. But when you hear this, Dr. Gene, and you read this, your thoughts on Emmanuel Sanders this season for Denver?
I've always been a big Emmanuel Sanders fan, and I've been disappointed that he wasn't able to make more of his talent than what he was able to in Pittsburgh, whether it was because, there were other wide receivers there at the time or the foot injuries were holding him back. But I like Emmanuel Sanders. I like his talent, and certainly that Peyton Manning-led offense is something that you want to target. So I have no problem seeing him as an undervalued fantasy play at this point.
And there you go. He is the great and amazing Dr. Gene Bramall, at Gene Bramall on Twitter. Make sure you check out Bramall's Second Opinion blog at footballguys.com. Dr. Gene, any final thoughts tonight?
Nope, not a one.
All right, Matt, get off my lawn. Any thoughts for you, my friend?
I think that's what Gene was saying to the dinosaur that he claimed was on his lawn a couple weeks ago. We need to see the video.
I think it's some sort of Godzilla sighting. What's going on? You have a moat. You have a castle, Dr. Gene. You're fine.
Tell us about the turtle, Bramall. Come on now.
Just had a good old moss-backed snapping turtle wandering through my front yard where there's no water around. I turned around and saw him out there, and he had a big dinosaur tail. I don't know. Maybe I had Godzilla on my mind or something, but we'll show the video at some point of me making the turtle mad.
He makes the turtle mad. Bloom makes the turtle come out of a shell. I'll leave that one alone. And Bloom will be joining us, of course, when he gets back from vacation. You can check out Matt Waldman. A few places. You need to do this. First off, Rookie Scouting Portfolio, Matt Waldman, RSP.com. Footballguys.com. On Twitter is at Matt Waldman. If you can't spell it, get off the internet. What the hell's the matter with you? I am Cecil Lammy, at Cecil Lammy on Twitter. The artist of this, coming out this month, Gravis, The Time of No Time. Make sure to check that out. And of course, you follow me on Twitter. I'll be talking plenty about that as well. We appreciate everyone out there for listening. Appreciate you for checking out footballguys.com and for listening to the Audible, subscribing, whether it's on Stitcher Radio or on iTunes, however you ingest the show. We certainly appreciate each and every one of you because we love talking about football, and we dig the fact that so many of you enjoy it. So, for the fantastic Matt Waldman and the amazing Dr. Gene Bramall, I'm Cecil Lammy saying, glad my headset worked this week. Stay tuned and stay frosty.